You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And it is the 10th of October, and we have been back from CrimeCon for quite a while, and you know what that means. It's time for the CrimeCon After Action Report.
Wow, that sounds like fun.
It does sound like fun.
So what did you make of this CrimeCon thing, Kristin Dilley?
Holy cow, it was amazing. Up until the food poisoning, but we'll get to that later.
Oh my gosh, I'd completely forgotten about the food poisoning. I put that out of my mind. Yeah, it was an amazing conference. I think, dare I say, the best CrimeCon ever.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Now, were there people that I wished I could see who were not there with us? Yes, absolutely. And that message goes directly out to Jim Clemente, who really should have been there but was not, alas.
Your FBI profiler crush.
My FBI profiler crush, yes. But boy, it was a real roundup of amazing, hard-hitting, fantastic, amazing people. And I really enjoyed myself.
I know there was one sad moment, which is you had said to me you wanted to meet Paul Holes, and I kept running into Paul Holes at various places at CrimeCon. And unfortunately, whenever I ran into Paul, who was everybody's investigative crush, I was not with you. So he and I chatted 3 or 4 times over the course of the weekend, and he always asked me what's going on with the Colonial Parkway Murders, how's your sister's case, that kind of thing, which I appreciate. And you had said to me, why am I not meeting Paul Holes?
It has been 3 CrimeCons now that I have not met Paul Holes, and I'd like to go on the record as saying I was promised by Mac and by the Middlemans that they would introduce me to Paul Holes because they're all such good buddies, and I did not get an introduction, and now I'm salty about it.
I do feel better about one thing, which is I thought I was the only one that you were blaming, but it's actually several different friends.
Yeah, and that somehow makes it worse, actually, because so many of you have access to Paul Holes, and yet I have been denied this access for 3 CrimeCons now.
Well, I'm concerned that he may not want to meet you because you're taller than he is, and that could be part of it. He may be avoiding you. And now Paul's going to be mad at me.
It is actually amazing. Just the number of people who throw themselves at Paul Holes.
Yes, mostly women, I might add.
Oh, yeah. No, I definitely heard that at his meet and greet, they had to shut the room down because there were more people in it than was allowable it was a fire hazard. The man created a fire hazard by having more than 2,000 people in the same room, all of whom were clamoring for him. It was crazy.
We could have gotten you into that room for sure. You and 1,999 other crazed Paul Holes fans.
It's crazy. Some people were even saying that he doesn't even stay on property anymore because he wouldn't get a minute's worth of peace, and I'd believe it.
I have no idea. I just run into him backstage at various points.
Well, it's because you're a VIP, Mr. VIP, and I think we should definitely talk about that as well, because there are perks to being Bill Thomas's podcast partner, and one of them is that since you get to do VIP things, I get to do VIP things too.
I guess that's true. So on a more serious note, there was a tremendous amount of incredibly positive conversation at CrimeCon. Yeah. It's not all just about who's the sexiest investigator out there, but a lot of conversation about advocacy, how to move true crime cases forward. I met a tremendous number of family members, many from cases that we all know from following true crime, as well as brand new cases which were heartbreaking that I'd never even heard of before. And I had a chance to meet those family members, talk with them. I'll tell you a little bit about a meeting that I attended with a bunch of people who have lost loved ones in these terrible crimes, and their assistance and camaraderie and the offers of help, for instance, to these people who've had something terrible happen in their families within the last few weeks or months. But I thought the overall atmosphere of CrimeCon was incredibly positive.
Yes.
People were having a good time. That shouldn't be lost on anybody. If you're a true crime fan and you want to go there and find out what's going on in the true crime space, find out about new television shows, new books, new podcasts, meet some of your favorite reporters and investigators, forensics experts, it just goes on. It's really an amazing place to be. There's an entertainment component to it, and I don't have a problem with that. People watch true crime because they find it interesting, and they listen to true crime podcasts like ours and others. The atmosphere was positive. It was very survivor supportive, which is hard to roll off the tongue. So people were treated with respect, I thought. And I think CrimeCon has really made a significant effort to make sure that people are respectful, which I appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. In every group of more than 5,000 people this year, I'm firmly convinced. Like the official number had to have been closer to 6,000. And so there's always going to be one or two bad apples that slip through. So did I see somebody or a couple of somebody's wearing BTK fan t-shirts? Yes. Yeah. And do I think that was particularly nasty considering that Carrie Rawson, BTK's daughter, was there? Yeah, I think that's awful. She should not have to go through the crowd and see people wearing her dad's face on a t-shirt. I hate that. I think that's awful. But that's only a couple of people. For the most part, though, we saw charming and funny shirts like "This person's my alibi," or "This is my CrimeCon t-shirt," or "This is my murder shows in comfy clothes t-shirt," all sorts of things like that.
Right.
And those are great.
I saw a lot of people with basically a detective shirts on, which makes me smile. And it's funny, I made some observations to you. The audience, and there definitely were more than 5,000 people there. This was a beautiful hotel, just absolutely gorgeous. And the ballrooms were gigantic. So it really held these thousands and thousands of people very well. It was never too crowded, I thought. At one point, in the early going, I took a long walk to a place where you could get a sandwich within the hotel complex, and I had a chance to sit for a few minutes, and I just watched people go by while I ate my sandwich. And just a few observations. The audience, overwhelmingly female. I think it's even higher than 70%. There were a tremendous number of women there. A lot of mother-daughter duos, and a lot of small groups of women that look like sisters or best friends who clearly watch true crime, listen to true crime, read about true crime. And this was something that they had planned as a kind of a fun weekend away, looking into an interest that they share. Yeah.
And I want to say, now that we're talking about audience real quick, I just want to say how absolutely positively blown away I was when within 5 minutes of me arriving, 3 hours late, we'll get to that in a second, I got to our booth, and within 5 minutes of arriving, not only did I find Catherine Ramsland, who'd been looking for me, thank God I found her because that was the only time I got to see her, and it was for about 10 minutes, but I also had, within 5 minutes, there were people walking up to me going, oh, you're Kristin, and I'm here from Williamsburg. And it was like, wait, you came from Williamsburg? And they were like, yes, to see you guys. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what? What do you mean you came from Williamsburg to see us? What?
That happened. That happened a lot. And on that,
it happened a lot. I was floored.
It's really nice. We met hundreds and hundreds of people. We met a whole bunch of people who are listeners to the podcast. And thank you all for coming up and being so nice and saying hello. And then we also met hundreds more people that came up to us and said, tell us about your podcast. And
or the case or whatever else.
Exactly. And they had a lot of questions, and we were passing out stickers and postcards and things like that. And we had a QR code on the back of a lot of our merchandise that allowed you to flip it over and it would take you right to Mind Over Murder. And people thought that was really cool. And they promised to check it out. And they had lots of questions. They were like, what's your podcast about? Who are the two of you? How did you get into podcasting? And we were on a place called Podcast Row, which is a very big ballroom chock full of podcasters. But there were also all sorts of other people in the room.
Yep. Yeah. And it's great because we had Robin Warder from The Trail Went Cold on one side. We had Mike Morford from Criminology and however many other podcasts he currently has at the moment. Doesn't he have 10?
He's got
Mike's on our other side.
Thing going on there.
Jess Betancourt was down at the end from DNA ID. We're in a group of our closest, most amazing podcast colleagues. Yeah. And we're sitting here hanging out with each other. It was so fun. For hours. Yeah. It's really neat.
It was nice because the podcasters had a chance to see each other and maybe take some pictures together. And then sometimes when large crowds came up, like to Robin Warder or other podcasters, we'd run over and take a picture for them so they could get a good picture with their fans. It was really a tremendous amount of fun. And interestingly, this year, Podcast Row had all sorts of other related entities displaying on Podcast Row. So it wasn't just about podcasts. There were a whole bunch of publishers who were putting out great new true crime books. Yep. There were a number of the technology companies, that is the labs, the tech companies like Othram, Verigen, and others. They had beautiful booths and they were explaining how DNA can help solve cases. They had everything from the police departments from various parts of the country, even recruiting people if they were interested in joining the Orlando PD. Yeah. And all kinds of really interesting merchandise, T-shirts and hats and all sorts of stuff. And then a massive bookstore next door where you could get all of the latest true crime books, which is one of Kristin's favorites.
One of the booths that I particularly liked was NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They were working on a really amazing ongoing art project all weekend, essentially, but they were working on a clay sculpture, building out what a child's face would look like based on the sketch that they had been given. And they were doing this clay sculpture all weekend long until, as we were packing up at the last minute, I saw them walking by with the finished clay sculpture of this child's face. And I was like, that is really cool. Because you could watch people doing this. And it wasn't just you're having to sit there and talk to people. You can interact. So they had Brian Netton from News Nation. He was there. They were doing stand-ups and stuff like that. You had Court TV. There were places where you can get behind the camera and kind of record yourself doing little stand-ups and things like that. It's very interactive. And then every year since I've been at CrimeCon, there's been the booth where you can try out different types of tasers and self-defense things. And I definitely looked into a taser until I realized you can't really bring a taser on a plane, idiot. Don't do that. Look at one and maybe.
You want to bring one to school. I know what you want to do.
What I was looking at, though, is I did ask them, I said, look, I'm a runner. What is my best option for this? And they were pointing out, here's some pepper spray. Well, no, I don't want to pepper spray anybody because what if it goes back in my face in the wind? I don't want to do that. And we finally talked about, okay, how about a tactical pen, which is something that Jim Clemente actually espouses.
I remember that. Yeah, he's talked about those.
So they had a couple of different types of tactical pens. Yes, they actually write, but they also have a glass breaker in the end, and one's got an embedded blade. And I love that. I think that's great. So
yikes.
In Nashville, when I'm driving and not flying, I will get a taser and a tactical pen and be ready for whatever should befall when I go running. But I love that. And that is something that has been there ever since I started going to CrimeCon, which was Nashville. But I love that they offer so many different things.
And this was your fourth CrimeCon and my fifth, I think?
Okay, wait. So Nashville, New Orleans. Vegas. So this was my fourth one. And then you did Austin without me.
And that was in the middle of COVID, but they had...
That was COVID year. Yeah, that was COVID. And then, so my fourth, your fifth.
Yeah. There were a lot of other amazing organizations there, like the National Center for Victims of Crime, and I did a panel with them later on in the weekend. There were so many great people there. It was almost overwhelming. There's so many experts you can meet, and we saw a number of people who have been guests on our podcast that we'd never met physically, because if you think about how we do the podcast, Kristin's in Virginia, Bill's in Connecticut, and the guest can be anywhere. And we typically will line up him or her on a Zoom call. We record the episode, but we don't meet necessarily. As a matter of fact, I would say in most examples, we don't meet the person. We might talk to them in advance, but we don't actually physically meet. So it was so great to be at CrimeCon, in particular at the Clue Awards, which was Saturday night, to have a chance to meet people and to thank them for being on Mind Over Murder, and how much we enjoyed talking with them, and how much we enjoyed whatever it is. They're a forensics expert or a scientist or an author, or how much we appreciated their willingness to come on and talk with our listeners.
Yeah, that was, I think, our only time to grab Dr. Michael Baden and get a selfie with him was right at the end of the Clue Awards, and he was getting mobbed by people anyway. So I think I was only able to actually pull him over for a selfie because I don't know if you heard what I said to him.
I'm not sure I did.
I leaned over, I said, Dr. Baden, I'd like to get a selfie with the nicest looking gentleman in the room. And he lit up and he goes,
oh, good line.
And he lit up. It was so sweet. And he was like, yes, absolutely. And then I reminded him, I said, you've done our podcast. And he goes, oh, just remind me your name again. And I reminded him, and he was like, oh, yes, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
And everything. So we did a couple of quick selfies with him.
He's such a lovely guy. And
he was so nice.
He's so smart.
He was so nice.
And he put up with us asking all of our questions on Mind Over Murder. And then when we met him, it was like he was really excited to say hello. There were so many people like that who were there. These are subject matter experts in a variety of different disciplines. And it's such a pleasure to hear them present, talk about their work. It was so interesting. If anything, all of the breakout sessions, as they call them, where different people are presenting on their new project or what it is they are known for, they're so interesting, and you have to make hard decisions about who's going to cover the booth for Mind Over Murder, as well as I really have to see this person or that person speak.
Yeah. And actually, so to that end, let's go through the weekend so that we can talk about the various things that we did. And we'll start with, you didn't have travel woes, but you certainly ended up having to get up early. You were up by 2 a.m. to get to CrimeCon, right?
I was up at 2:30 in the morning, left the house at 3:15, get to the airport at 4 o'clock, 6 a.m. flight, fly straight down, pick up the booth and my bag, take a lift directly to the airport. And so I got to the hotel at about 10:15, I think. And it took me an hour to set up the booth. Now, and you were, of course, texting me that you've been delayed.
Yes.
And
we're going to get to that in a second.
So I got the booth set up. And of course, I thought to myself, when Kristin gets here, she's going to change everything I just did, but at least I'll get us up and running. And there were so many people waiting to get into CrimeCon and into Podcast Row. They actually opened up early. So at 11:30, even though we were scheduled for 12, they opened up, and a flood of people came into Podcast Row. You start doing the whole meet and greet and saying hi to folks and telling them about your podcast, or in many examples, meeting folks that already listened to Mind Over Murder. And it was really fun. But I missed having you there, Kristin, but I knew you were delayed.
I had originally figured, okay, as long as I get to Orlando within a couple of hours of CrimeCon starting, it'll be fine. So my original plan was I've got like a 9:30 flight. It'll be down there by 11:30. I can get to everything. I'll be with Bill by, say, about 1 o'clock. Worst case scenario is it takes me that long to get my luggage and go to the hotel and then head over to the venue. But the flight got delayed because the plane coming from Orlando had mechanical difficulties.
Oh, I thought this was the storm that hit.
A storm was rolling in, and we had a couple of terrifying moments where we were like, oh my God, if this plane is delayed any longer, we're going to be delayed getting out of here because a tropical storm was coming in. But no, the main reason was the plane leaving Orlando, which incidentally and interestingly, a friend of mine was on the Orlando end, because he kept posting to Facebook and he was like, my flight from Orlando back to Richmond is delayed. And I wrote, you son of a bitch, your plane is the one that I need to get on and you've delayed it somehow or another.
I need that airplane.
So we were texting back and forth, and I was waiting at the gate for him when he disembarked, because it really was his plane and that I needed to get on. He came off. He'd been at Universal and Disney and a bunch of other places for a couple of days. And I yelled across the terminal, dude, where's my plane? And he goes, it's right out there. But yeah, we ended up being delayed by that mechanical issue on the ground in Orlando. So it didn't get to Richmond until later, and we didn't get to Orlando until later than that. So by the time I finally got to you, it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock maybe. You'd already gone to do your advocates group, which I want you to talk about in a second. And so I arrive, our booth is there. And you're right, immediately I reorganized and lined up all of our postcards and stickers.
Apparently, I'm not good at that stuff.
I know, it's just, I have a touch of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Just a touch.
Just a touch. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
I had gone random rakish angles all over the table, and you came along and put everything in very neat little piles.
Neat little stacks and everything. And I know it drives you nuts. I know it must. But it's just one of those things. I'm so ridiculously regimented about the way that I wanted things to look good. So yes, I rearranged the table. I saw a couple of people who recognized me, and then I had a couple of people who came up very concerned because they hadn't seen you and they wanted you.
Oh.
And I was like, he went to a group and he'll be back later. And then I met up with Shane Waters and we realized, oh wait, we've got a podcasters thing that we're going to. We better hustle it upstairs. Mm-hmm. And I was a little worried I couldn't get into the podcasters thing because you had my badge. Because I'd asked you to pick it up for me.
And we were not physically together at that point.
Yeah. So I was a little worried that I wasn't going to be able to get into the podcasters penthouse party, but I was able to, thankfully, because Alice recognized me.
Oh, good. And something important happened, and a lot of people have been asking us about it. Friday evening, before Kristin arrived, and I want to thank everybody for their expressions of support and concern, 2 sets of people came up to me, Kristin was not there yet, and had information about the Colonial Parkway murders. Now, we can't get into what information they provided, but it was actually quite important. And this was 2 sets of 2 people back to back. I was surprised. In both examples, they said they were listeners to the podcast, and they were both from Virginia, and they had information in different aspects of the Colonial Parkway murders, which we've since passed on to law enforcement. I was steamed with myself because I was short on sleep and a little frazzled. I wasn't like here I am when I'm in my home office / podcasting studio where I've got paper in front of me and a pen and I'm ready to go with various forms of technology. Mm-hmm. Somehow when I spoke to this first duo, they gave me information about the Colonial Parkway murders, which I thought could be quite important. Ultimately, it's up to our investigators to decide these things. They had given me this info, and I didn't write down their contact information like an idiot. I was a little frazzled, and I didn't go get my briefcase and pull out a piece of paper and write down an email or phone number or something. They had said they were very eager to meet you, Kristin, which, of course, a lot of people said that. And they said they were going to come by later on in the weekend because CrimeCon goes Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I thought I was going to see them again, and I don't think we ever did connect. Mm-hmm. Now, interestingly, the second pair of people that came up right after that first pair, and this again may have played into my dropping the ball about finding contact information for the first pair of people, they had information, but I actually knew their names because not everybody that listens to our podcast participates in our social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those things. But these two people in particular, they do. And so when they said hello, I recognized their names. I was like, oh gosh, yes, you've commented from time to time. Good, thoughtful comments. And so they had information on the Colonial Parkway murders as well, which was all new to us. And that was very interesting. We passed that on to law enforcement as well. Because I'd connected with the second duo, I knew how to get a hold of them, and they actually did stop by the next day. But I don't think the first pair of people stopped by. I was so annoyed with myself because we wanted to get this information to law enforcement. I wanted to talk to them again. And then when we got to the end of CrimeCon, I said, for the life of me, I can't remember their names. And we'd met hundreds of people and talked with who knows how many people. As a matter of fact, my voice was even starting to go by the end of CrimeCon.
Yeah.
And I was so upset with myself because I said, I don't know how to get a hold of these people. So we tried a couple of different things, and I know a number of you had commented on this. We tried putting up notices on our social media.
I think got increasingly dire over the day.
No, really, we really want to talk to you.
Yeah, so increasingly dire sounding, yeah.
Yeah, because you're not trying to be alarmist or whatever, but when someone tells you something that you think could be important and you would like to get into the hands of the investigators, and only the investigators can evaluate whether information is important or not. But it seemed important to us. And so we tried different things. So Kristin put up notices on Facebook, and then I did Twitter and Instagram, and then we did it again. And then actually the second pair of people who had contacted us, they circled back with us and said, did you need to hear from us again? And we're like, we're actually looking for a different pair of people.
Different pair of people. But we're glad to hear from you.
But we're very glad to hear from you. We tried a couple of different things, and then I thought, let's put up a notice at the front end of our next episode of Mind Over Murder.
Yeah.
So we tried that. And then we tried it again. And I hope we weren't annoying anybody by this point, but people were like, have you heard from these people?
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, a listener texted me this afternoon and said, did you ever hear from those people? And I said,
yes.
Why? Yes, we did. But interestingly, it wasn't until a listener suggested, Bill, why don't you put up that same notice on one of the CrimeCon Facebook groups? And I said, that's a good idea. So I went ahead and did that. And then the CrimeCon people got a hold of me, and they're like, is there anything we can do to help? We want to connect this pair of people with this pair of podcasters so you can pass along the information. And eventually we did hear from them. We did pass along the information to law enforcement, and they're following up. And so it all worked out fine. But thank you, everybody who asked about it, offered suggestions. And interestingly, it was that final suggestion, try the CrimeCon social media pages, not just Mind Over Murder, which obviously one podcast has a certain number of people that look at social media. It might be thousands of people, but we only needed to reach two. But we needed to reach those two people. And by the way, they never said, but I got the impression they might have been on vacation or something. Afterward. We were in Florida. We were in Orlando, and we were right across the street from a place called Disney World that you may have heard of. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
It was insane. The traffic outside Disney, oh my gosh. It was crazy. So yeah, we were finally able to connect with those people, and that was just one of the many. So you and I had met on Friday night. You had done your advocacy group, which we want to talk about. You and I had done the podcasters meet and greet up in the penthouse. Thank you, Kevin, for allowing us up into the penthouse where we could see this great view of all of the Disney parks. Then afterward, it had to have been about like 10 o'clock at night or something like that. And you and I got back to our hotel. We were staying off site and we were sitting down in the bar and you were telling me all of this information. And I could tell you were exhausted because you'd been up since 2 a.m. And you were like, I don't have the name of that first person. And I was like, oh, I'm sure they're going to come back around.
Oh, sure.
It was just the worst when, we realized by the end of the weekend, oh no, they never came back by. And it turned out that was something that we really needed to be able to tell law enforcement. Thankfully, all's well that ends well, but it is a crazy, exhausting weekend. And you were up far earlier than I was. So I could tell by the time we were done with the end of the day, you were through the ringer.
Yeah, I think I was more fully functional on Saturday than I was on Friday.
We were definitely better off on Saturday, although Saturday is just a very full day.
It sure was.
And it was crazy. And so I guess one thing that you really have to keep in mind when you do CrimeCon is be willing to go without sleep if you want to do a little bit of everything, because you need to be there early. You need to be willing to stay all day. And one thing for participants in particular, you got to make sure you have chargers with you. You got to make sure you have food with you because there's so much to do. Like you said, you're not going to want to leave between sessions and miss out on something. So it becomes like you're having to make decisions about where am I going from 1 minute to the next. And if you don't want to miss a session, that might very well mean you don't get lunch or you don't have time to charge your phone. You don't have time to go back up to your room. It's a very hectic, very full set of days. And so I got smart for this one. I wasn't smart about it at Vegas, but I got smart for this one. And I had protein bars and I had crackers in my backpack. I brought a charger with me. I had extra drinks and stuff because there was no guarantee between being in the booth and going to see stuff that I was ever going to be able to go out and get a meal. And I didn't. I don't remember eating on Saturday until we got to the Clue Awards.
Yeah, it was quite a day. Saturday was an amazing day. As Kristin mentioned, I was invited to attend a small-scale meeting with a new group that CrimeCon is putting together. And Kevin Balfe, who's the guy that runs CrimeCon, and the aforementioned Paul Holes had an idea of putting together a group of people who've lost loved ones as a result of criminal violence. So this would be a lot of people that you would know from cases that you would know. Nicole and Joe Schmidt and Joe and Tara Petito were there. These are Gabby Petito's parents. And very interesting with the four of them. Her parents divorced a number of years ago and they both remarried. They are amazing people, incredibly positive and sweet and just really great, nice people who've been through the ringer in terms of losing Gabby and then, of course, the media firestorm that occurred as a result of Gabby's disappearance. But it's interesting, these two couples, including her mom and dad who, divorced, they get along so amazingly well. They actually finish each other's sentences. And they're the loveliest people. And they've now set up Gabby Petito Foundation, and they're doing a lot of really worthwhile things. They want something good to come from losing Gabby, and they were incredibly wonderful. And there were a number of other people that you would know. Carrie Rawson, who was BTK's daughter, Margaret Wardlow, who survived the East Area rapist, or who later became known as the Golden State Killer. David Robinson, who's been looking for his son, Daniel Robinson, for 2 years. Lovely, lovely man. Becky Patty from the Delphi case. She's the grandmother of Liberty German, one of the two victims in that case, together with her friend Abigail Williams. Becky's absolutely lovely. And then there were new people that had terrible things had happened to them recently. There was a woman who spoke named Melissa Winters. She was speaking about her missing child case. So this has just happened within the last few months. It was amazing listening to these other pretty highly experienced people. I mean, you had the sister survivors from the Golden State Killer case there who were just amazing people. And they were offering advice, and it was pretty powerful. It was supposed to be an hour and a half. And someone made the decision after we just had brief remarks from Paul Holes and Kevin Balfe welcoming everybody. someone said, why doesn't everybody go around the room and talk a little bit about who they are and what their involvement in this thing is? So we made our way around the room. And of course, these are some people that I know and many people that I admire. To listen to each person's story briefly was incredibly difficult. There were a lot of tears and a lot of pain, and it was difficult. I told Kristin, I know I told you this afterward, I felt like I'd been through a washing machine, like I felt wrung out listening. Some people only spoke for a moment or two, and other people spoke for a couple of minutes. And everybody was respectful. They just let them talk. As you made your way around the circle, you realized there were about 30 of us, I would say, in the room. And every single person in that room has been directly touched by criminal violence. And man, some of the stories, including the new ones, there were a couple that were so shocking. They were so hard to listen to because you were like, how can one human being do that to another human being? And these were, like I said, some very high-profile cases that all of us that follow true crime know about, and then a bunch of cases that you've never heard about before, you haven't heard about yet. And each one was equally heartbreaking in its own way. Man, it was a privilege to be in the room, but it wasn't much fun.
That is one of the things that I think I'm most blessed by to be able to experience at CrimeCon. It is a privilege for me every single day to work with you, Bill, because you are dealing with, I think, some of the worst trauma and pain that anybody can, but here you are doing it. You're advocating for Kathy. You're advocating for the rest of the families in these cases. You're advocating for everybody who has gone through a magnificent and tremendous loss. You're not letting it beat you. You're getting up and living your life and doing everything and trying to make the world a better place for everybody else in it. And that's a privilege for me, but it's even more so when, I'm not just getting to hang out with Bill today. I'm getting to hang out with Jane Carson Sandler and Debbie Domingo and Margaret Wardlow.
Right.
Who I had a very intense and very heartfelt and moving conversation with two of the three of them at CrimeCon in Vegas. And I was able to follow it up this time by telling them, as a result of the conversation that we had, because of the things that we have gone through and that we have shared, I was able to make these changes in my life for the better. And I wanted to thank you both for that. And that always results in tears and hugs and this sense of shared, we're fighting, but we're getting through it. Whether you're talking to Kathy Kleiner or Jane Borowski or Jane or Debbie or you or anybody else, it is my great privilege to be able to share this with you guys and to know that here you are, you've suffered this awful stuff, but you're still standing and you're still thriving. And that's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
But I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to sit in that room.
Yeah, it's an honor to meet those people and to be in the room with those people, but to hear their stories, even the short version of their stories, is not easy. We're putting together this group, they're calling it the Advocates, and they asked us just the other day in a follow-up email, are you interested in continuing to participate? And I said, of course, yes. And I hope that a number of other people will feel the same way. We're going to talk about where we want to take this group and what we want to do with this collection of people. And it occurred to me, I thought of John Walsh from America's Most Wanted. He had said that we're members of the club that no one wants to be invited to join. And it does feel like that. I think any of us would give anything to not be invited to a meeting like that because we hadn't experienced what we have. But it was a rare and special, but not an easy place to be.
CrimeCon has definitely become, as you mentioned at the top of the pod, a place for survivors, a place for advocates, and a place where people who are trying to do some good in the world can come together and continue to make good things happen. And people are able to connect with each other in a way that they might not otherwise. I would say that probably there were a number of great, impactful, emotional moments from that weekend. But I think probably the one that I am going to have resonate with me for a long time was being able to introduce Jane Borowski to Kathy Kleiner.
I was thinking about that. Those two women had never met before and were each big fans of one another. And what a privilege to introduce those two people.
And just the way that they both survived something that very few other people on this planet will ever survive. They survived two serial killers. And that was amazing just to see the way that, and Kathy is so very generous. And as soon as I said, hey, Kathy, I want to introduce you to Jane, Jane gasped.
Yeah.
Because I told her, she knew who Kathy was. And she gasped and she goes, oh my gosh. And Kathy just held out her arms to her and she's, come here, it's okay. Like, we got it. And there were tears and it was a real privilege to be able to introduce those two amazing women and to watch them heal each other. And the most interesting thing that I take from every time I talk with Kathy, because she says it a number of different times in her book, in the panel that she did with you and Brian and Renee, she says that talking about it helps her heal.
Yeah,
and
I thought that was interesting.
I think that's amazing. And so I like the fact that CrimeCon offers a place for people like Kathy and Jane and everyone else who has suffered to be able to heal by talking about it if that's what they need. And if they don't want to talk about it, that's fine too. They can meet other people and gather resources and things. But I like the fact that there is so much dialogue around this is experience, both shared and individual. And here is how we can build a community that is going to help people survive it and thrive in spite of it.
And one of the things that's worth noting is that, for instance, with Jane Borowski, who survived the Connecticut Valley serial killer, still unidentified after all these years, and Kathy Kleiner, who's better known as surviving Ted Bundy. So many of these other people that you meet at CrimeCon, they're incredibly positive people.
Yeah.
And so there's actually a lot of joy and a fair amount of laughter, and people are having fun, and people are celebrating being alive. And you can't have people like Cheryl McCollum and so many other people, Joseph Scott Morgan, and I could just keep naming names. They're just incredibly positive, joyful, life-affirming people.
Yeah.
And so even though they deal with some very heavy issues and work with survivors and helping to solve cases and just deal with some heavy stuff, they're also joyful, fun, caring people who are really so great to be around. It's very inspiring.
Yeah. It really is. And so that does mean when you're having to figure out, okay, am I going to listen to Joe Scott Morgan? Am I going to go listen to Kathy? Am I going to go listen to Nancy Grace, do what Nancy Grace do? You have to make a lot of hard decisions. So on Saturday, as always, you and I had to figure out where are we going? What are we doing? Who's going to be in the booth? And we did have to figure out what are my absolute musts.
Right.
So I actually only had one absolute must for Saturday. Like, it was a non-negotiable. It was absolutely had to go listen to Dr. Ann Burgess talk about her work at Quantico. Yeah. And that blew me away. Wow. It was amazing. And the fact that I got to go with podcast overlord Tim Polari and Jen Amell and go listen to, it was like, not only do I get to listen to this amazing lady, I get to do it with two amazing podcasters. Like, how cool is this? What is my life? Like, how did I get this privilege to be here? It was so cool. God, she is absolutely amazing. What a firecracker, what energy, and what an amazing mind. She is so intelligent and just so completely amazing. I adored her session. It was so cool.
Yeah. Now, there's one I missed but would love to hear another time. And by the way, a number of these sessions are available. Fox recorded a number of sessions, and we'll put links in the show notes here. And CrimeCon also has a subscriber level that you can join that would also allow you to hear and see a number of these presentations. So there are ways to enjoy CrimeCon online.
We have so much more information that we want to share about our time at CrimeCon. And of course, we have to share all about the panel that Bill was on with Renee Williams and Kathy Kleiner-Rubin and Brian Enton. So we are going to continue our coverage of CrimeCon and our after action report in a second episode. That's going to do it for this episode, but please stay tuned for our next one. Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.